Okay, I think we can get started, and this session will be repeated again if somebody wants to join it and see it. Good morning, or afternoon, wherever you are. My name is Scott Moreland. I've been at Palladium for quite a number of years. Some of you may know me from previous projects we've worked together on. This activity, this thing I want to talk about this morning, is a field support activity financed by the DRC Kinshasa mission. Interesting little sort of background to it is that some of you may remember the family planning conference that was held in Kigali a few years ago. And during that conference, we actually presented another model that was developed under HP Plus called the Family Planning SDG model. And after that presentation was made, we had a conversation with actually the director of the Norwegian Aid Agency, or one of the people from the Norwegian Aid Agency who was working in DRC and wanted to know whether the model could accommodate linkages between population and forest cover deforestation. And we eventually got funding from the mission to do just that, and as well as to apply the FP SDG model. So this morning, I'm just going to rapidly show you what we've done here. This is a really almost a pilot project, but I think that with the current interest in climate change and environment and so forth, I would venture to say that it's a strategically located, particularly for those of us who work in family planning. How do I advance this thing here? So let's back up a little bit and think about why we care about the forests. They're a valuable natural resource that provides benefits at not just the community level, but the national and ultimately the global level by providing food and medicine and non-timber products and employment to forest-dependent populations. Excuse me. Also, employment for those who work in the timber industry and timber revenue to the extent that that exists, depending on the type of logging that goes on. And then, in terms of impact on the environment, you've all probably heard of carbon sequestration, which is the process by which trees and other natural resources, such as plants and peat bogs, absorb carbon from the atmosphere, so that when those resources are not there or are cut down, it effectively increases the amount of carbon in the atmosphere because they're not absorbed. It's not because that they emit carbon; it's that they absorb carbon. But now, if those resources are cut down, they're not able to. So they act as a natural sink to cleaning up the air. They also provide, of course, because they are forest, biodiversity and the protection thereof, and that's also important. And then, lastly, the water cycle and maintaining rainfall and so forth is a longer-term sort of impact. Deforestation is threatening, however, the world's forests. We're all pretty much familiar, probably, with the saga going on in Brazil with the Amazon basin, but the DRC also is experiencing significant amounts of deforestation. Although the rate is actually quite small, it's a large area that it's being that the deforestation is taking place in. So it's an important potential loss of natural resources in terms of forest cover. And this graph shows on the top the sort of historical trend in forest cover loss globally, and then the bottom bar chart shows the ranking of forest loss in the top 10 countries. What causes deforestation? Well, we talk about three main sort of direct causes. One is commercial logging. that's where people are basically going into the forest, cutting down the trees, exporting them for wood. This is something that's important in countries like Papua New Guinea, where palladium is just starting to work up, where the logs there are exported mainly to China and producing wood products that are ultimately end up in places like Home Depot or Lowe's. The other main threat or cause of deforestation is infrastructure construction, mainly roads. So when you build a road into a rural area, you've got to clear the path for the road and the perimeter around that. And then, of course, road construction also allows population to grow and population centers to improve to get larger, and that also has a secondary impact on forest cover. And then the last one, which is the one we'll focus on in this presentation, is agriculture and livestock expansion, basically slash and burn agriculture, or cutting down of the forest in order to have room for crops or for livestock grazing. So in the agricultural area, we identified in the process of this activity through a extensive literature search 6 main root causes of deforestation. The top of the list is population, but also contributing to deforestation is poverty, where forest communities are sort of interested and forced in some cases to sell their land for revenue. Gender also comes in, not just in terms of the links to poverty and population, but also there's good evidence that forests that have more of an impact or input from women are better managed. Governance is also important, as it is in a lot of other sectors, including public health. The economy and the growth of the economy, which puts pressure on the natural resources for sale. And then armed conflict is particularly important in situations like the DRC, where there's a couple of linkages there, including sort of the equivalent of sort of blood diamonds. So these 6 root causes are going to be important in the way that we looked at going forward with modeling. So we wanted to develop an advocacy tool for showing the links between family planning and population growth and forest cover and deforestation. And like a lot of our models that we developed under HP Plus and its predecessors, we focused on family planning and population, but we also included other contributing factors to deforestation, and those included the 5 other root causes that I just showed you. This tool could be used for advocacy. It can also be used for integrating family planning into what are called RED plus strategies. RED stands for reduction in emissions through for reducing deforestation, reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation. So like a lot of the models, the model can be used for looking at how investments in family planning can lead to changes in this case in forest cover. So the model actually consists of 3 interlinked models, all of which are available for free. There's no special software that's required. We use for the population area known spectrum population projection program, which is linked to the Excel program, which is the population forest model. The population forest model basically projects outputs in terms of deforestation, loss of forest cover, and carbon value. And the carbon value is produced or is calculated with a link to an FAO model called the ex-ante carbon balance model, which is one which is used extensively by people in the forest industry. So let's take a quick snapshot of some of the results here. And I'm going to focus on two scenarios, very simple scenarios where all we did was change the modern contraceptive prevalence rate over a period of some 31 years, from 15 in the base year to 30 in scenario 1 and to 50 in scenario 2. So scenario 2, the green line, is the more aggressive one. That results in a reduction in fertility from 6 to about 4.83 in scenario 1 to 3.28 in scenario 2. This has an impact through the model on the rate of deforestation. As you can see here, it's lower in the scenario 2 scenario than in scenario 1, and also that means that the loss in forest cover is less under scenario 2 than it is in scenario 1. You'll notice that these are very small rates of deforestation, less than 1/4%. But remember that is applied to a very large area. In fact, I don't have it on the screen here, but if you look at the total forest loss over the period, it's about the size I calculated of the state of Massachusetts in the U.S. In terms of impacts on CO2 emissions, these numbers here probably don't mean a lot to you, but the important thing is that the emissions go down relative to between scenario 2 and scenario 1. The reason that they're going up over time there is that deforestation is continuing under both scenarios, although at a lesser rate, as we just saw under scenario 2. And then at the bottom here, we just did a little back of the envelope cost-benefit calculation using some family planning cost data from Guttmacher Institute and some CO2 values from the World Bank RED program that's being applied in Africa, where they're using $5 a ton. And you can see that the value of carbon that is saved through scenario 2, and that purple chart there is the difference between the values in the of the carbon in the top graph, and you can see that the cost-benefit ratios here are quite significant, starting at 10-1, and then it goes down a little bit to 6-1 at the end of the scenario. So this suggests to me, in the policy area, that there's a significant argument here for linking family planning investments to other strategies to reduce carbon and deforestation. So I'll stop there and take any questions or open the floor for discussion for anybody. If you want to put your questions in the chat box, that would be good. So one thing I thought was interesting, and this sort of came up at the end there, as you saw in the analysis, was to consider as we go forward, particularly those of us working in family planning advocacy, is there a story to tell here with the people in the RED plus sector that goes on here? Actually, in the DRC, we worked with a group called FONARED and CAFI, which stands for the Central African Forest Initiative, and they actually do already recognize in what they call pillars they do actually look at, recognize that there's a linkage between population and family planning and and climate change and deforestation. But my point is that if we make it more explicit when these countries approach funders of REDD programs, maybe they have to present a scenario or a set of programs as to how they're going to reduce deforestation. And one of the things that they might want to consider, if they understand the linkages such as we're seeing here, is the linkage to family planning and the payback they would get. Kwame is asking, or Linda is asking, how we calculated the 10-to-1 ratio. So it's basically the ratio of the purple bars to the brown bars. The brown bars are the cumulative cost of family planning of scenario 2 versus scenario 1. So it's the extra cost of bringing in more people with a higher level of contraceptive prevalence, using, I think it was a figure of about $10 annually per family planning user. And then the purple bar is the difference in, if you take the difference in cumulative emissions over the, as you go forward from 2019 to 2050, the purple bars are the cumulative value of carbon that is not emitted as a result of the difference in the two scenarios. So it's sort of an opportunity cost sense. Sorry, it says 6-to-1. Yeah, the 10-to-1 is in the first year, and the 6-to-1 is in the second year. And the reason that it goes down is because as population continues to grow, basically the denominator, the family planning cost continues to get it higher, because you're not only having more people in family planning, but you're having more people in the reproductive health area. So it goes on like that. I think that we're getting, if there are not any more questions here, I think it's time to move on to for you to join another session. Thank you all for attending this.